I didn't expect 3 years of silent planning to lead to the moment when I'd walk into my former workplace and hand my old boss an eviction notice for the entire building. But when Richard stood there with trembling hands reading that his lease was terminated and I was now his landlord, I simply smiled and said the same words he'd humiliated me with. Maybe in your next life. Before we dive into this incredible story of workplace revenge and ultimate success, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more amazing comeback stories, and comment below where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Marketing's open office floor buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I sat in the weekly team meeting, surrounded by 32 coworkers who were about to witness the most humiliating moment of my professional life. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I'd been working at Sterling for almost 4 years, believing that dedication and competence would eventually lead to the promotion I'd been pursuing. Richard Blackwood, our department director, stood at the front of the conference room in his expensive navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression carrying that familiar mixture of arrogance and contempt that had made him the most feared manager in the company. He was reviewing quarterly performance evaluations, and when my name came up, the atmosphere in the room shifted like air pressure dropping before a storm. "Speaking of promotions," Richard said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "I noticed that David here has applied for the Director of Client Services position." He gestured toward me with a theatrical flourish, as if introducing a circus act. "David, would you like to share with the team why you think you're qualified for a leadership role?" I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. 32 sets of curious, expectant gazes waiting to see how I'd respond to what was clearly a setup. My throat felt dry as sandpaper as I cleared it and tried to sound confident. "Well, Richard, I've been here for 4 years. I've exceeded my targets every quarter, and I've led several successful client campaigns, including the Morrison account that brought in $2.3 million in new business." Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "The Morrison account? You mean the account where I had to step in personally to save the relationship after you nearly lost them with your creative approach?" My face burned with embarrassment. That wasn't what had happened at all. Richard had indeed stepped in, but only to take credit for a campaign strategy I'd developed after spending weeks understanding Morrison's unique market position. But correcting him in front of the entire team would be career suicide. "And as for exceeding targets," Richard continued, clearly enjoying himself, "meeting minimum expectations isn't the same as leadership material, David. Leadership requires vision, strategic thinking, the ability to inspire confidence in both clients and colleagues." He paused, looking around the room as if addressing a jury. "Let me be clear about something, team. David is a perfectly adequate account coordinator. He shows up, he does his tasks, he follows instructions reasonably well. But director material?" Richard let out a theatrical laugh that made my stomach clench. "David, you're too, let's say, operationally focused to ever handle strategic responsibility." The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on in the background. My coworkers were staring at their laptops, their phones, anywhere except at me, as if witnessing my professional execution was too awkward to watch directly. "You want to know what I really think?" Richard's voice dropped to a stage whisper that somehow made his words more devastating. "You? Director? Maybe in your next life, buddy. For now, why don't you go fix that jammed printer in the copy room? I think that's more your speed." The laughter started small. A few nervous chuckles from Richard's usual sycophants, but it spread through the room like a virus. Within seconds, 32 people were laughing at me, at my ambitions, at the idea that I could ever be anything more than the guy who fixed office equipment. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, feeling the heat of humiliation wash over me like a fever. Every laugh was a knife, every smirk a confirmation that my colleagues had never seen me as anything more than a competent functionary who didn't know his place. "Well," Richard said, his eyebrows raised in mock expectation, "the printer isn't going to fix itself." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me, and walked out of the conference room without saying a word. Behind me, I heard Richard's voice. See what I mean about leadership potential? Can't even handle a little constructive feedback. More laughter followed me down the hallway as I walked toward the copy room, past cubicles filled with people who were already turning my humiliation into office gossip, past the break room where I'd eaten lunch alone for 4 years, past the bathroom where I'd practiced presentations that would never be taken seriously. The printer was indeed jammed, a metaphor so obvious it felt like the universe was mocking me. I spent 20 minutes unjamming paper, clearing error codes, and replacing toner cartridges while the words, "maybe in your next life," echoed in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. When I finished, I didn't return to the meeting. Instead, I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and began working on the quarterly client report that was due that afternoon. Around me, the office buzzed with its usual activity, but I felt invisible, irrelevant, like a ghost haunting a building where I'd never really belonged. At 4:47 p.m., Janet from HR appeared at my desk with a manila folder and the kind of apologetic expression that meant my day was about to get worse. "David, I need to speak with you privately," she said, glancing around the office to make sure she wasn't overheard. "Can you come to my office?" HR's office smelled like vanilla air freshener and disappointment. Janet closed the door and sat behind her desk, the manila folder unopened between us like evidence in a trial. "David, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve that much," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "Richard has decided that your performance today in the team meeting demonstrates a lack of professional maturity that makes you unsuitable for continued employment at Sterling Marketing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm being fired for asking about a promotion? The official reason is failure to respond appropriately to management feedback and displaying unprofessional behavior during a team meeting, Janet read from a document in the folder. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Your access to company systems has already been revoked." I stared at her, trying to process what was happening. "Janet, you were in that meeting. You heard what Richard said to me. How is that professional management feedback?" Her expression softened slightly. "David, I've been doing HR for 15 years, and I've learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to someone is getting fired from a job that was never going to appreciate them anyway." She slid the folder across the desk. "Your severance package, COBRA information, and final paycheck. Security will escort you out, but I want you to know that this has nothing to do with your actual work performance. Your client satisfaction ratings were consistently the highest in the department." Then why? Because Richard Blackwood is a small man who feels threatened by competent people, and unfortunately, he has the authority to destroy careers when his ego gets bruised. The security escort was Marcus, a kind man in his 50s who'd always greeted me warmly in the mornings. As we walked through the office toward the elevator, he leaned close and spoke quietly. "Whatever happened up there, don't let it define you, son. I've seen a lot of good people walked out of here over the years, and most of them end up better off." But his kindness couldn't diminish the humiliation of the walk itself. 32 pairs of eyes watched me gather my personal items from my desk, the small succulent plant my sister had given me, the coffee mug I'd bought on vacation in Portland, the framed photo of my parents from their anniversary dinner. 4 years of my professional life reduced to a cardboard box that fit under one arm. Richard was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in his office to avoid the awkwardness of facing me after destroying my career. But his absence felt intentional, a final insult that suggested I wasn't even worth a face-to-face dismissal. As Marcus and I waited for the elevator, I heard whispered conversations from nearby cubicles. Can you believe he actually thought he could be a director? I mean, Richard was harsh, but he wasn't wrong. Did you see his face when everyone started laughing? The elevator doors opened like the gates to exile. As they closed behind us, Marcus patted my shoulder and said, "Sometimes the best revenge is just living well, David. Don't forget that." I nodded, but inside I was thinking about something else entirely. Not revenge. That seemed too small, too personal. What I was thinking about was proof. Proof that Richard Blackwood was wrong about me. Proof that his assessment of my capabilities was as flawed as his character. Proof that maybe in your next life was about to become maybe in this one. That night, I sat in my small apartment in North Austin, staring at the cardboard box of office belongings on my kitchen table. The severance package was generous, 3-month salary, which was more than I'd expected. But the humiliation burned in my chest like acid reflux that wouldn't go away. I replayed the meeting in my mind, hearing Richard's voice over and over. "You're too operationally focused to ever handle strategic responsibility." The laughter from my coworkers. The way Janet had looked at me with pity in her eyes. The security escort passed people who'd supposedly been my colleagues for 4 years. But as the anger settled into something colder and more focused, I began to think about what had really happened in that room. Richard hadn't just fired me. He'd revealed something about himself. He'd shown that he saw competence as a threat, that he preferred keeping talented people in subordinate positions where they couldn't challenge his authority. More importantly, he'd shown that he had no idea what I was actually capable of. During my 4 years at Sterling, I'd watched Richard take credit for strategies I'd developed, clients I'd won, problems I'd solved. The Morrison account was just one example. There was the Henderson Industries campaign that had saved their relationship with a major client, the social media strategy that had increased engagement by 340% for the Peterson Group, the cost reduction plan that had saved Sterling $180,000 annually in vendor fees. All ideas that Richard had presented to senior management as his own innovations. All solutions to problems he couldn't have solved himself. All proof that his assessment of my capabilities was not just wrong, but deliberately dishonest. I opened my laptop and began making a list. Not a list of grievances or revenge fantasies, but a methodical inventory of every client relationship I'd built, every successful campaign I'd developed, every process improvement I'd implemented that had made Sterling more profitable. By 2 a.m., I had 17 pages of documented contributions that Richard had either ignored or claimed credit for. But more importantly, I had something else. A business plan. The co-working space I rented for $240 a month was a far cry from Sterling's sleek downtown offices. Located in a converted warehouse in East Austin, it smelled like coffee and ambition, filled with freelancers, startup founders, and other people who were betting everything on their ability to build something from nothing. My office was a desk in the corner next to the window, just large enough for my laptop, a notebook, and the framed photo of my parents that had followed me from Sterling. The first week, I felt like an imposter surrounded by people with computer science degrees and venture capital connections. But gradually, I realized we all had one thing in common. We were all trying to prove that someone else was wrong about our potential. I named my company Meridian Consulting, a reference to navigation and finding true direction. The business model was simple. Provide the same marketing services as Sterling, but with better client communication, faster turnaround times, and more transparent pricing. No corporate bureaucracy, no ego-driven decision-making, no taking credit for other people's work. The first month was brutal. I spent my severance money on business registration, liability insurance, a professional website, and basic office supplies. I lived on ramen noodles and granola bars, sleeping on the co-working space's couch when I couldn't afford the gas to drive home to my apartment. But I also spent that month doing something Richard had never bothered with. I reached out to every client I'd worked with at Sterling, not to poach their business, but to ask them about their experience with the company. The responses were illuminating. "David, you were the only person at Sterling who actually listened to what we needed," said Maria Santos, marketing director at Morrison Industries. "After you left, we've been dealing with Richard directly, and frankly, it's been a disaster. He doesn't understand our market at all. I always wondered why our campaigns performed so well when you were the point person, then fell apart when Richard took over," admitted James Chen from Henderson Industries. "It was like working with two completely different companies. Sterling's been trying to upsell us on services we don't need while ignoring the problems we actually want to solve," explained Lisa Rodriguez from the Peterson Group. "We've been thinking about looking for a new agency. By the end of the second month, I had 3 clients who were ready to jump ship from Sterling if I could provide the same quality of service they'd received when I was managing their accounts. By the end of the 3rd month, I had signed my first contract. Peterson Group, for a 6-month digital marketing campaign worth $45,000. Richard had no idea that his best clients were leaving because they were following me, not fleeing from him. David, this is exactly what we needed, Lisa Rodriguez said during our 3-month review meeting at Peterson Group's downtown offices. Our engagement rates are up 89% since we started working with Meridian. And more importantly, we actually understand why the campaigns are working. She slid a check across the conference table. $45,000 for the completed contract, plus $15,000 bonus for exceeding performance targets. We want to sign an annual contract for $180,000. Can you handle that level of growth? I looked at the check, thinking about Richard's words. Maybe in your next life. 3 months earlier, I'd been fixing printers and eating lunch alone in Sterling's break room. Now I was being offered more money than I'd made in 2 years as Richard's subordinate. Lisa, I can absolutely handle that growth. In fact, I think we can do even better than what you've seen so far. Within 6 months, Meridian Consulting had grown from a 1-person operation to a team of 4 employees, working out of a proper office space. We'd signed 12 clients, including 2 that had left Sterling after becoming frustrated with Richard's management style. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a LinkedIn message from Jennifer Walsh, Sterling's Senior Vice President. David, I hope this message finds you well. We've been experiencing some client retention challenges recently, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you back to Sterling in a senior role. Would you be interested in a conversation about returning as Director of Client Services? I stared at the message for 10 minutes, imagining Richard's face when his boss told him they wanted to hire me back at the level he'd claimed I could never achieve. The temptation to screenshot the message and send it to every person who'd laughed at me in that conference room was almost overwhelming. Instead, I wrote back, Jennifer, thank you for thinking of me. I'm flattered by the offer, but I'm building something important with Meridian Consulting, and I'm not interested in returning to Sterling at any level. I wish you the best in resolving your client retention issues. I didn't mention that I knew exactly why Sterling was having client retention issues. 3 of their biggest accounts had moved to Meridian, and 2 others had told me they were actively looking for new agencies after becoming frustrated with Richard's arrogance and incompetence. 2.5 years after my humiliating exit from Sterling, Meridian Consulting occupied the entire 3rd floor of a renovated historic building in downtown Austin. We employed 23 people, had annual revenue of $3.2 million, and maintained client satisfaction ratings that Sterling couldn't match despite having 5 times our staff. But the real breakthrough came when my commercial real estate attorney, Michael Vega, called with an opportunity that would change everything. David, you know how you've been talking about purchasing property as an investment? I've got something that might interest you. The Meridian building downtown? Yes, the one Sterling Marketing leases 2 floors of, is going up for sale. The current owners are retiring and want to liquidate their Austin properties. I set down my coffee and leaned forward in my chair. Sterling leases space in that building? Floors 4 and 5, plus half of floor 6. They're the anchor tenant, paying about $24,000 per month for approximately 15,000 square feet. Their lease runs through next year, but there are some interesting clauses you should know about. Michael emailed me the building's financial documents and lease agreements. As I reviewed Sterling's lease, signed 3 years ago when Richard was negotiating their expansion, I found exactly what I was looking for. Section 12, subsection C, which prohibited subleasing, operating competing businesses from the premises, or misrepresenting the tenant's annual revenue for insurance and tax purposes. According to the building's management company, Sterling had been subleasing 3,000 square feet to a small graphic design firm without permission, had listed their annual revenue as $8.2 million when it was actually $12.7 million. And Richard had been operating a side consulting business from his office using company resources. Each violation was grounds for immediate lease termination with 30 days' notice. Michael, what's the asking price for the building? $4.2 million for the entire property. It's a good investment even without the Sterling situation. Downtown Austin commercial real estate has been appreciating at 12% annually. I thought about my financial position. Meridian Consulting's success had allowed me to save aggressively, and I had $1.8 million in liquid assets plus excellent credit. More importantly, the building's rental income would easily cover the mortgage payments, even if Sterling moved out. Make an offer for $3.9 million. All cash, 30-day close. David, are you sure about this? It's a big financial commitment. I smiled, thinking about Richard's words from that humiliating conference room meeting. Michael, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The sellers accepted our offer within 48 hours. 3 weeks before the building purchase was scheduled to close, I visited Sterling's offices for the first time since my termination. I told the receptionist I was there to meet with potential clients who worked in the building. Technically true, since I was planning to offer them new lease terms after evicting Sterling. The fourth floor looked exactly the same. Open floor plan with cheap cubicles, harsh fluorescent lighting, the same jammed printer I'd been fixing the day I got fired. But what struck me most was how small it seemed, how uninspiring, how perfectly it reflected Richard's limited vision and petty management style. I walked past my old desk, now occupied by someone who looked about my age when I'd started at Sterling, and remembered the dreams I'd harbored about moving up in the company, earning Richard's respect, building something meaningful within Sterling's structure. What a waste that would have been. Near the coffee station, I overheard a conversation between two account coordinators. I heard Peterson Group fired us last month. That's the 4th major client we've lost this year. Richard keeps saying it's market conditions, but I don't know. My friend works at that new company, Meridian Consulting, and she says they're signing new clients every month. Meridian? Isn't that the company that guy David started after Richard fired him? Yeah, and apparently they're killing it. I heard Morrison Industries moved their entire account there after we screwed up their Q3 campaign. I smiled and continued walking toward the elevator, feeling like a ghost observing the consequences of Richard's leadership. Sterling was slowly bleeding talent and clients, while Richard remained oblivious to the damage his ego was causing. The building purchase closed on a Friday morning. By Monday afternoon, I had reviewed every lease agreement and identified the violations that would give me legal grounds to terminate Sterling's tenancy. By Wednesday, I had consulted with 3 attorneys who confirmed that the violations were clear and unambiguous. By Friday, I was ready to deliver the news personally. I dressed carefully that morning. A charcoal gray Tom Ford suit I'd bought to celebrate Meridian's first $1 million year. Italian leather shoes that cost more than I'd made in a month at Sterling, and a Swiss watch that reflected my success. Without being ostentatious, I looked like what I'd become, a successful entrepreneur who had built something meaningful through competence and integrity. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like ascending to a final confrontation I'd been preparing for 3 years. When the doors opened, I stepped into Sterling's reception area with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Because, legally, I owned the building and had every right to be there. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize who must have been hired after my departure. "I'm here to see Richard Blackwood. Tell him David Chen is here with some business documents." She picked up her phone and dialed Richard's extension. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a David Chen here to see you about business documents." I heard Richard's voice through the phone, tinny but clear. "David Chen? I don't know any... Wait. David Chen from... Tell him I'm busy." "Sir, he says it's regarding the building lease and it's urgent." A pause. "Fine. Send him back, but I only have 5 minutes." As I walked through the familiar office space toward Richard's corner office, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Former colleagues stared at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to embarrassment to outright shock. I nodded politely to a few people I remembered fondly, but kept walking with purpose. Richard's office looked exactly the same. Fake leather furniture, motivational posters about teamwork and success, framed photos of him shaking hands with clients I'd brought to the company. He stood behind his desk as I entered, clearly uncomfortable but trying to project authority. "David," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that was more territorial than welcoming. "This is... unexpected. I heard you started some kind of consulting business." I shook his hand firmly and sat down without being invited. Some kind of consulting business was earning more profit per employee than Sterling. But I wasn't there to debate our relative success. "Richard, I'm here in my capacity as the new owner of this building." His expression shifted from uncomfortable to confused. "Owner? What are you talking about?" I placed a manila envelope on his desk, the same type of envelope that had contained my termination papers 3 years earlier. "Inside, you'll find a formal notice of lease termination due to multiple contract violations. 30-day notice to vacate the premises, and information about your options going forward. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope and began reading. I watched his face change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic as he processed the legal documents. You can't. These alleged violations are minor administrative issues. We can fix them immediately. Richard, you've been subleasing space without permission for 18 months, misrepresenting your revenue for insurance purposes, and operating a personal consulting business from company premises. These aren't administrative issues. They're material breaches of your lease agreement. His voice rose defensively. Everyone does stuff like this. It's not a big deal. It became a big deal when you decided to humiliate me in front of 32 people and fire me for asking about a promotion I'd earned. It became a big deal when you spent 4 years taking credit for my work while treating me like I was too stupid to notice. Richard leaned back in his chair, finally understanding the scope of what was happening. You bought this building just to evict us? I bought this building because it's an excellent investment property in a prime downtown location. Evicting you is just a pleasant side benefit. I stood up and smoothed my suit jacket. You have 30 days to vacate. After that, security will remove any remaining property, and you'll be liable for trespassing charges. As I turned to leave, Richard's voice cracked slightly. David, wait. We can work something out. I can offer you a lease renewal at market rate, or maybe we can discuss you bringing Meridian into this building as a tenant. I paused at his office door and looked back at him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that the person he dismissed as incompetent now controlled his professional fate. Richard, 3 years ago you told me that I'd never be director material. You said maybe in your next life when I asked about a promotion I'd earned through 4 years of excellent work. I smiled the same cold smile he'd used during my public humiliation. Well, it turns out this life was sufficient. I own this building. You're being evicted for lease violations. And your biggest clients are working with my company now because they got tired of dealing with your incompetence. Richard's face had gone pale. David, please. I know I was harsh back then, but we were under a lot of pressure. I was trying to motivate you. You were trying to keep me in my place because you knew I was capable of doing your job better than you were. The difference is that now I don't want your job. I've built something better. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a business card from Meridian Consulting, placing it on his desk next to the eviction notice. When you're looking for a new office space, give us a call. We specialize in helping businesses that are struggling with leadership and client retention issues. As I walked out of Richard's office, the entire floor had gone silent. 30 people were watching me leave, but this time it felt like a victory lap rather than a walk of shame. I nodded to a few former colleagues, smiled at the receptionist, and pressed the elevator call button. Behind me, I heard Richard's office door slam shut. The elevator doors opened just as Richard burst out of his office, his face flushed and his voice carrying across the entire floor. You think you're so smart, don't you? He shouted, loud enough for everyone in the office to hear. You bought one building, and now you think you're some kind of real estate mogul? I stepped out of the elevator and faced him directly, aware that 30 pairs of eyes were watching this confrontation unfold. Richard, I think I'm exactly as smart as I always was. The difference is that now, I don't have to pretend otherwise to protect your ego. Your little company won't last 6 months without Sterling's clients propping you up. He continued, his voice growing more desperate. You stole our accounts through corporate espionage and unethical business practices. The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. I won clients by providing better service than Sterling could. The same way I'm going to find new tenants for this building by offering professional property management instead of whatever passes for leadership around here. You can't just destroy people's careers because your feelings got hurt. Now I did. Laugh. But it wasn't a pleasant sound. Richard, I'm not destroying your career. I'm simply declining to subsidize it with below-market rent while you violate your lease agreement. I looked around the office, making eye contact with several former colleagues who were watching our exchange with fascination. 3 years ago, this man told me I was too dumb to ever get promoted. He fired me for asking about opportunities I'd earned, then escorted me out of the building like a criminal. Today, I own this building, My company has higher client satisfaction ratings than Sterling, and Richard is getting evicted for violating his lease. I turned back to Richard, whose face had gone from red to pale gray. The difference between us, Richard, is that I spent 3 years building something instead of 3 years making excuses. I proved you wrong not by arguing with you, but by succeeding despite you. Richard's voice dropped to almost a whisper. What do you want? Money? An apology? Just tell me what it will take to fix this. I don't want anything from you, Richard. I wanted to prove that your assessment of my capabilities was wrong, and I've done that. I wanted to build a successful business that treats people with respect, and I've done that too. What happens to you now is entirely up to you. I pressed the elevator call button again. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and turned to face the office one final time. Oh, and Richard? The printer by the copy machine is jammed again. You might want to fix that yourself this time. The elevator doors closed on Richard's stunned expression, and 30 co-workers who were already pulling out their phones to text about what they'd just witnessed. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Michael Vega called with an update on Sterling's situation. David, Richard's attorney, wants to discuss a settlement. They're claiming the lease violations were unintentional and offering to cure all breaches immediately in exchange for a lease extension. What are they proposing? 3-year extension at current rates, plus $50,000 in additional security deposits, and agreement to monthly compliance audits. I thought about the offer. Sterling's rent was actually below market rate for downtown Austin, and keeping them as tenants would provide steady cash flow while I looked for other opportunities. But there was something satisfying about forcing Richard to negotiate from a position of weakness. Counter with this: 5-year lease at market rate. That's $32,000 per month instead of $24,000. $100,000 security deposit. Monthly compliance audits at their expense. And Richard Blackwood cannot be the signatory on the lease or have any authority over Sterling's tenancy decisions. You want them to remove their own department director from lease authority? Michael, Richard has proven he can't handle legal agreements responsibly. If Sterling wants to stay in this building, they need to put someone competent in charge of their facilities management. The counterproposal caused exactly the reaction I'd expected. Sterling's senior management was forced to confront Richard's violations and his inability to manage basic business relationships. Within a week, Richard had been demoted from department director to senior account manager, with no authority over facilities, contracts, or personnel decisions. Sterling's new director of operations, Jennifer Walsh, called me personally to accept the lease terms. David, I want to apologize for what happened 3 years ago. Richard's behavior was unprofessional, and frankly, losing you was one of the biggest mistakes this company has made. Jennifer, I appreciate that, but I'm not looking for apologies. I'm running a business, and Sterling is now a tenant in my building. As long as you pay rent on time and comply with your lease terms, we'll have a good professional relationship. I understand. And David, for what it's worth, watching you build Meridian into what it's become has been impressive. You've proven a lot of people wrong. After I hung up, I sat in my office on the 3rd floor of the Meridian building. I'd renamed it after purchasing it, and looked out the window at downtown Austin's growing skyline. 3 floors above me, Richard was sitting at a desk without a window. No longer in charge of personnel decisions, no longer able to fire people for asking about promotions they'd earned. The revenge was complete. But more importantly, the proof was undeniable. I hadn't just gotten even with Richard. I transcended him entirely. While he'd spent 3 years managing other people's work and taking credit for their successes, I'd built something real, something valuable, something that proved his assessment of my capabilities was not just wrong, but laughably inadequate. 6 months later, I got a LinkedIn request from Richard Blackwood. I'd like to buy you lunch and apologize. I was wrong about your potential. I declined. Recognition came too late. That afternoon, Richard showed up at my office. He looked worn down, his suit tired. Sterling is shutting down the Austin branch, he said. But I'm here because I owe you an apology. He admitted everything, taking credit for my work, sabotaging my promotion, humiliating me out of insecurity. Corporate had uncovered it all during an audit, and he'd been blacklisted across Texas. For years, I'd imagined his downfall. Instead of triumph, I felt pity. He asked what was next. I gave him a contact in Denver. "Why help me?" he asked. "Because your dismissal pushed me to build something bigger than Sterling," I replied. We shook hands, free of rivalry at last. As he left, I looked at the lease offers for Sterling's former space. My company was thriving, my people trusted me, and my clients stayed. The revenge was complete, but success had become the real answer. Richard lost everything trying to hold me back, and I gained everything he said I'd never achieve, that 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 I